Hey everybody, welcome to the first episode of Victor's Van, the YouTube series. There's going to be more on another tube site that I probably can't say on YouTube, or I will get censored and demonetized and stuff. Not that I really care about it. Demonetization on a channel with 0 videos. But, trying not to set myself off on the right foot. Welcome to Victor's Van. I'm Victor Styles. I've been swinging whips for 7 or 8 years now, trying to be the best BDSM dominant that you can be. DSM. Just like that. Anyway, I'm here because I finally... I read this book, right? I had this book some years ago. Had it in my Amazon cart. Got it. Helped me kind of like figure out some ropes with this BDSM relationship. One of the first ones that I was really very deep and very serious about. And I got it. I kind of flipped through it, and now that I live in a van, trying to pare down my possessions, this book came back up, and I gave it a read to see if it was something that I needed to keep in my library, my very modest library, or not. That book is The Control Book by Peter Masters. And this is my book report reading on it. Like, should you buy this book? I guess that's the question that we're going to talk about here. So, what is Peter trying to do with this book? Peter is talking about control. Control is like in an ephemeral sense. Sorry, you just saw my totally not BDSM pants. It's okay. Forget they're not there. Okay. The point of this book is to explore the dynamic of control. What it means when somebody has control. What does it mean when somebody takes control, gives up control? How does that flow look? And I think that this concept is useful to a point. Okay? If you are a novice to BDSM, you saw some fancy videos, or your partner is like, hey, I want you to tie me up, or I want to tie you up, or and you're trying to get the point of it, right? I think this is the audience that he was going for. Because me, as a 7-8 year BDSM dominant, whatever, I found that that central principle of control is not really enough to cover the scope of BDSM. More importantly, and this is gonna make me sound like such a fucking SJW, but I really think that this is as a idea, I think that you need to pair control with the concept of consent. And Peter does this a little bit. He talks about it in the sense that control is something that is given up by the submissive. He claims that let's see here. Here's from the blurb on the back. People we call tops, bottoms, dominants, submissives, masters and mistresses, and slaves. However, what they're called isn't that important. What is important is how they use control. Brief aside. He obviously doesn't define these things, right? You have the top side of the BDSM and the bottom side, right? The giving and the receiving, the person who has control and the person who yields it, right? Total cop-out by not giving any more definitions of that, right? I understand that your book's about control, and in a very kind of abstract sense, this is important to talk about. But if you're going to have an introductory text and not bother defining any terms, then I don't know, it's kind of weird. So as control without consent, as this concept, like you need to, in my opinion, you need to understand consent because it's like a continuous process. As a dominant, you need to understand how far you're willing to go, right? Like you have this beautiful picture, and that's the lines of consent that the submissive has drawn for you, and you, the dominant, get to color in those lines. Beautiful, yes, great. And like taking control and the perception that the submissive is giving up control means that there is a gap in interpretation, right, from the submissive to the dominant. And if all they say is like, oh yeah, I can dominate me, which is how this book kind of like lays it out, then I think that there's, that gap in communication where danger happens, right? Beyond just the scope of like abusers and BDSM, which is an entirely different conversation. Without that understanding of consent and where to draw the lines, then with all this control, it's like having a flamethrower in the wilderness, and you point it wherever the fuck you want, and like, oh no, I just lit up this super dry brush, whatever. California metaphors, right? You're going to start a wildfire if you don't have your own boundaries and sense under control. So that was one thing I didn't like, right? As an introductory text, we have something very important that we're talking about in the ephemeral BDSM context, and that's control. But I think like the other side of that coin, consent, is really missing from this book. And I'm going to flip through it, and I'm going to talk about some things that I did like. Okay, so one thing he does talk about, he does like talk about the psychology, which is good, right? Like the fundamental, how do I call this? Like neurophysiological patterns in the brain that are common to all humans that we exploit when we do BDSM, right? One of these is like the neurological pathways of pain and sensation being tied up with the same ones they're tied up with pleasure. I have a submissive who studies psychology, and her angle is actually a very clever one, I think, that you have this hijacking that takes place of the sensation, and its association with an emotion is what causes you to go, oh, this is bad, this is good, this is something I should run away from, this is something I should run towards. And so in the BDSM context, because control and consent, I need to say the two of those things for myself because you can't have one without the other. Because control and consent in these BDSM contexts gives us this sort of mental primer that when we feel the sensation of, oh my god, I just got my bottom smacked, then we actually can associate that with pleasure as opposed to terrible pain. So that's roughly one of the examples that I think of when I think of psychology, and Peter Masters offers some good ones, I think, because I don't want to say that this book is entirely like, I'm going to rip on the entire book. Like, there's some good stuff in here. He does talk about the parts of the psyche, right, the unconscious and the subconscious, and where those different structures live that we exploit, right? Some of these things, like the subconscious, is like, you got your knuckles wrapped by the nun when you took all your clothes off to go pee, and now you have a fetish for getting wrapped by nuns when you getting peed on or something, whatever, right? That's your subconscious. Likewise, the unconscious is, all of our like lizard brain sort of stuff, and he talks about that and the proponent, like the parts of BDSM which kind of fall under one part of the psyche and which parts fall into the other. Talks about archetypes as it's kind of like a next level up from the gross organization of the brain. And I think archetypes are very, very handy to know. I wish that he had given more examples. As an introductory text, the examples he gives are very like, I feel like basic like Game of Thrones level archetypes, It's like the mother and the protector and what are some other ones he gives? But, it's like this like these like 7 or 8, right, whatever gods of the Game of Thrones universe, and like that's the archetypes you think of. But like there's a lot more common characters and themes of the stories that we tell ourselves. And there are so many different ways to exploit those, but he sticks with a very, like, narrow kind of set of them. Whereas, like, okay, here's an archetype, daddy, right? We all have a father figure, maybe, right? Like a large quantity of us. I'm sorry. If you don't, I hate to use language that excludes you here, but I'm talking like as an archetype, right? Like not everybody has a protector or a mother either, but we all understand this like paternal figure of daddy. How does that play into BDSM? Very critical. But since Peter doesn't want to like make any define any terms, then we're left with like, you know, just the very like basic ones. So that was another thing that I didn't like. Another one is this is very like heteronormative and very like swagger. I'm just, you know, looking forth now. It's like how to like pick up a submissive in a club, and it's like like go up, smack her ass, go, hey toots, you want me to beat you up a little bit? It's like, come on, man. Like I will say this. This is written in 2006. So if there are any updates or anything like that, I'm so sorry, Peter, for not reviewing your latest version, but I needed to get this out because I can get rid of this book. I just needed to do this. I needed to do this book review. So, here, look, you see my not BDSM pants? Ah, the veil is lifted. Oh my God, I'm just a guy. Whoa. Okay. So, then he like. These like weird kind of like abstract sort of scenarios where there's like fundamental process that he's talking about, right? It's like a 4-step: dominant, ask for control, submissive. Wait, see here, let me get this straight. Submissive puts control up, dominant asks for control, submissive yields control, dominant takes control, right? So it's like bounce, bounce, bounce. And like the ball, you know, goes back and forth to submissive. Okay, sure. And then he goes through this process of like, yeah, here's how I can go wrong is if you go up, smack toots in the ass, and she goes, oh, and then you walk away, you're leaving her dangling. It's like, you know, that's not the issue here, right? Like, if you wanted to take control, what you should have done is you should have asked. And then within the context of what you got to work with, then you go forward with that. If you didn't want that, then you don't ask. And so he, like, creates this imaginary scenario. I don't know if, maybe not imaginary. Maybe this is something that he has experienced in his own personal life. But as for me, like, the process of a dominant and a submissive, like, meeting and negotiating is like more than just smacking the ass going, oh, and then you're like, hey, you want me to whip you? There's a little bit more there, right? Okay, so moving on, losing control. This wasn't a bad chapter because these are things that like have happened to me, right, where you don't want to shake up the fantasy, right? You don't want to like let the veil slip, because then your sub is going to be like, imagine having a gag in my mouth. Not really in their submissive role anymore. They're kind of like wondering what the fuck is going on. So, yeah, that happens. And some of these things are like, this is preventing it from occurring, right? That's it. I don't know. There's a lot that I could say on the subject, and I think that might make a good video. But to me, the crux of it is that as the dominant, okay, let me put it this way. When you're in a social situation and things get awkward, does it ever happen to you, right? You're just like, oh my God, that's awkward, right? The only people for whom it is awkward are those who let awkwardness happen to them, right? If you are the kind of person like me who goes around in the world and, contextualizes people's actions in terms of like, all the life experiences they've had up to that point, and all the inputs into their like noggin that they've had that are like fresh on top of the pile. Explains their behavior, I think, right? It's like this like Ram Dass quote. You go through the forest and you see all the trees, right? And like, oh, clearly this one was planted on a hill, so it grows off to the side. This one had good sun, so it grows up nice and straight. And this one is kind of all wiggly because it's had some troubles in its life. And you don't judge any of those trees. Those trees just are, right? Kind of the same thing with awkwardness, right? This is you let things get awkward because you have your prescriptions of how other people should behave. But if you like I'm gonna finish this thought and I'm gonna come back around to where I was, I promise. If things get awkward and you have to come back around to it, pardon me. So things get awkward and you let them get awkward. Control disappears when you, the dominant, let it disappear. Here's the magic part of being a dom is like, if you're fumbling with ropes, don't go like, oh shit, I'm fumbling with ropes. Now your submissive knows. Their like hands are tied behind their back. Most of the time they don't know how to tie fucking knots, right? That's why they're the bottom. Some people switch. Sorry if my language excludes you off the top of my head. I promise I'm gonna be working on it. But yeah, so like, don't just like, in terms of like letting so this all comes back to letting go of control, just I think that there's so much more to be said. If anything, if this rambling aside is anything, there's more to be said about preventing the laws of control from happening than what's in here. Okay, so next stage, the next chapter, reward and encouragement. This is great. I think that's important. But again, really short chapter. Giving back control. Sure, the ritual of it, I can totally agree with that. Okay, coming to the chapter on safe words. This is going to be great. Safe words are an excellent idea. Yes, totally agree. He does talk about plain English safe words, which is worth a whole other video by itself. Like, you don't have to. You can retain control without like creating the entire fantasy of like the deep dungeon shit, and you just be like, hey, how did you like that? You want me to hit you a little bit harder? And that's something that he does talk about. But yeah, I'm that props to Peter on this one. I will say I think that this chapter on safe words is definitely deserves its own chapter. I'm glad he gave it. Yeah, so that's a bonus. Let's see here. Oh, communication, right. Okay. So this is where things are like kind of get a little like, I don't know, my WOGAS is not big on these like gender stereotype stuff, obviously, but that's the entire dynamic that he leans on is this male dominant, feminine submissive sort of thing. And yes, okay, some of this is good stuff, like submissive logic, right? Like talking about subspace, they can't understand teasing or taunting. That's right. When your submissive is good, you tell them you're a good slut. Can't process complex situations. They don't understand double bind situations. I don't know if is that double bind? The double blind? I don't know. Whatever. Can't process complex. This is all more or less stuff that I agree with, but on the whole, it's very like heteronormative standard stuff. If that's what you're about, like, then whatever, then go buy the book, right? Like, but I think in 14 years later, it's not really that useful in this context. Chapter on 3, 1, 2, 3. I love playing with 3. That's a good one. Okay, and then management. This is the sort of when I picked this book back up. This is what I wanted to like uh, enrich myself with, was someone's perspective on management in the long-term sense, like maintaining a sense of submission throughout one's existence, not just in the bedroom. This is for a long-term DS dynamic, established partners, etc., etc. And it was just not what I wanted in here, and that's not Peter's fault, but it really is more focused on like the scene level stuff, and some like very general establishing like routine, right? Routines and rituals. That's an important thing in BDSM. And while we touch on this, most of what I think like the critical stuff that we lean on in BDSM in terms of routine and rituals is like relegated to some discussion topics in the back. And so he does like the overview of what it means to have a ritual and a routine and stuff like that. Here we go. This is the chapter about rituals. Here's the chapter about structure. Right, and so what I wanted here, this is, I think, kind of the motivation for me to make this video, which is now 20 minutes long. Holy shit. I just didn't find enough solid pieces of inspiration to draw on. Unfortunate, but like, again, I think this is more of like aimed at first timers, but given the years that have passed, I think the context is like, it kind of falls into this weird in between space. Okay. And then a brief chapter on ownership, brief chapter on delegation, and then we get to the discussion topics, which I think are like some of the more like critical and interesting things to talk about in BDSM. Let's go through some of these discussion topics. Okay, what can you do to ensure that your submissive feels there has been full closure? I think that is a perfect time to give examples, and Richard doesn't give any examples. Sorry, Richard? Peter. Oh, shit. Have I been calling you David and Richard and shit? His name is Peter Masters. I'm so sorry, Peter. If I ever meet you in real life, by the way, please let me buy you a beer. I think I owe you that. Because I'm just some guy on the internet. You like wrote an actual book and put it on Amazon. Let me buy you a beer, okay? Let's talk about this, because I'm sure the past 14 years you've grown as a dominant as well. I'm sure that I have a lot to learn from you. But my personal perspective at this moment is this wasn't what I was looking for. And no shame, but like I think some of this stuff is really great. But it like is just discussion topics in the back. All my favorite topics that I would have seen. Like this one is about magic. Like magic in BDSM, there's so much to talk about. Magic with a K, magic with a C, like whatever. That deserves its own video too. But like it deserves its own video, it deserves its own book, and Peter gave it not even one whole page. Look at this. It's like with the header, we got about that much header. That's it. My gosh. Satiation, humor. This is the page on humor. Yeah. It's not the rhythm. Okay, we got. It's just more. It's just more stuff that I think would be really handy if you had given your opinion in the rest of the book and given examples and stuff like that. But you relegated all what I think the interesting bits to discussion topics in the back, and I kind of spent an afternoon and didn't really get much enriched out of this. Like, I guess that's kind of my biggest gripe with the book, is that it sits in between a weird spot. There's plenty in here for, I guess, experienced people, at least in the sense that you're not going to be establishing a full 24-hour a day, 7-day-a-week ritual, or establish BDSM relationship with somebody if you're brand spanking new. You shouldn't. You shouldn't. I don't. Sorry, personal experience. If you're very new to this, don't jump into a 24/7 dynamic. Personal experience. I feel like you probably don't know what the fuck you're getting into. Just saying. Probably worth its own video. There's definitely some biographical, like, influence there, but yeah, if you are an experienced, established dominant, there are some bits that are relevant to you, but very superficial. If you're experienced, established dominant, you probably have all these sorts of ideas of, like, you know, ritual and this, like, the flow of the scene, stuff like that. You have that internalized, and now you're, like, maybe looking for specifics and examples. At least I was, to take it to the next step, but they're not in there. Likewise, if you are a new comer to the scene, a new dominant or submissive, you want to know what it's all about, great, there's plenty of stuff in there for you, but there's some critical bits missing in 2020 that were, you know, maybe not, like, super talked about. 2006, cough, cough, consent. We had this whole movement, hashtag Me Too, and that was only, like, 3 years ago. So, like, yes, I get it. I get why this book was written when it was written. I get why it's still on Amazon right now. Probably because they haven't sold out yet. They haven't republished, but whatever. And I think that's kind of like my synthesis. That's my book report. That's my thesis. Is that, like, half of it is for experienced people, but the stuff that experienced people are going to want, like examples and important things, are missing. And half of it is for newcomers. But for those newcomers, there's critical context missing in 2020. So this book kind of feels like it fits a gap in, like, that doesn't, like, exist. Like, there's no void that this book fills in 2020. And so I would, if I had to give it a star rating, 2.5 stars. And yeah, like, if you pick it up and you read it, you will pick something out. There is something to be gleaned from it. Is there... How much does this book say that it's worth? I think I paid $12 for this or something like that. Is it worth $12? I don't know. If you, like, want to have a cool red and black spine on your, like, library shelf, then yeah, fine. Maybe it is worth your $12. But, like, in 2020, I would have to say no. But again, my sincerest apologies to Peter. This is not coming at you from a personal place. This is just the book that I had laying around. And this is, like, I was really excited to read it, and I was a little disappointed. And so now I've been carrying it around in my van with me, and it's been staring at me, waiting for me to make a book report video about it. So here it is. And Peter, if you ever release a second edition, or if you're ever in the States, because I know you're Australian, or likewise, if I ever go to Australia, which sounds like a dope spot, except for little wildfires and all the wildlife tries to kill you all the time, and the fact that there's, like, rednecks, shitloads of them apparently, just like here. Apparently Australia's really great though. I would love to come visit. Or if you ever come to the States, let me know. I will buy you a beer. If you ever make a second edition, let me know. But until then, that's my book report. Stay sexy and keep that strong hand.